So I created ONE9 while I was a squadron commander in our national mission unit, all with a view of like finding a tax efficient way. When I saw the scale of the sales that were happening, I'm like, God damn, that'd be better to buy that company. Really started exploring what it meant to do some angel investing, which pivoted very quickly towards venture capital investing, and with some great investors, and sort of brought to market what is now Special Mission Fund 1, which is Canada's kind of first and only national security, critical infrastructure, and defense-focused venture capital fund.
This is All Quiet on the Second Front, a podcast where boring conversations around defense tech and national security come to die. Join me, Tyler Sweat, and my Second Front comrades as we dismantle the mundane, cut through the bureaucratic BS to demystify the world of defense tech. But be warned, this is not a typical government podcast. Ready to get weird?
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm your host, Tyler Sweat. Welcome to another episode of All Quiet on the Second Front, the podcast where boring defense talk goes to die. We are going to cross some borders today. I'm pretty excited. I'm not going to make any Mountie jokes or maple syrup jokes or anything like that. But we're going to get really interesting, and I think bring a little Canadian national security and defense in. So Glenn, one, thanks for joining us. And two, really excited to sort of pop the hood. I think you bring a really different perspective. So thanks, brother.
No, man, it's great to be here. And what, about 5 weeks ago, we met in person, and I knew when we went and shot Gatling guns and drank bourbon that you and I were going to be fast friends. So what an intro meeting that was, but it's great to come on to the All Quiet podcast and give a little perspective on what we're seeing north of the border.
Yeah, man. So you alluded to, we got to do our version of breaking bread, which was, Gatling guns and MP5s and bourbon. For those who haven't had the good fortune of getting to know you or being familiar with the organization, who are you? A little bit of the background. What are you working on now, and sort of what's that look like for you?
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit of our story. And start talking about a pretty exciting investment sector that we're sort of all collectively focused on, which is national security and defense investing. So my name's Glenn Cowan. I am kind of one of one in Canada as a venture capitalist focused on national security and defense. And my background really kind of comes out of a special operations background. So I spent 19 years in the Canadian Armed Forces. About 13 and a half of those years were with our special mission unit, focused on sort of tactically relevant strategic tasks in support of the strategic interests of the government of Canada. But really that is counterterrorism, hostage rescue, and sort of highly strategic sort of intelligence collection tasks, not unlike what you'd see with some of your tiered special mission units down in the US. And it was, I always get the question of like, why investing, why venture, what's the synergy? And I started my investing career way back in like 2004, 2005. And my first investments were into commercial self-storage, and it was done with tour money that I had coming out of a CJ SOTF in Afghanistan, where we were working alongside a bunch of SEAL teams, prosecuting kind of JPEL targets in southern Afghanistan and the Kandahar region. And our government at the time made some of our take-home money tax-free. And I think I could have bought like a baller pickup truck, but I decided to invest my first 50K into my best friend's alternate lending business into commercial self-storage, which ironically or coincidentally remains my biggest investment holding now. It's done really well. I'm still in personally, but as I built the business and started to build sort of my investment track record, I realized a couple of things about it. One, I don't actually like commercial self-storage. I don't really understand anything about cap rates or how to like sort of maximize a return from that type of asset class, but it's a superior performing asset class. So let the pros do what they do really well. And that's what that crew did. And so I needed to siphon investment coupon. So I created ONE9 while I was a squadron commander in our national mission unit, all with a view of like finding a tax efficient way, which, joke, we need that in Canada, a tax efficient way to kind of process this debt coupon. And that really led me into my first sort of fund investing as I built out a proprietary investment fund. I left the unit in 2016. I was medically released with an injury that I sustained, and started working for a couple of tech companies that were building cyber solutions and drone solutions with a special operations and national security focus. And kind of had this aha moment in about 2017, 2018 of, rather than trying to sell gear and trying to sell kit and work off a commission, when I saw the scale of the sales that were happening, I'm like, God damn, that'd be better to buy that company. And so really started exploring what it meant to do some angel investing, which pivoted very quickly towards venture capital investing. And with some great investors and anchor investors and mentorship, sort of brought to market what is now Special Mission Fund One, which is Canada's kind of first and only national security, critical infrastructure, and defense-focused venture capital fund. We were anchored by a large private equity investor out of Toronto called Kensington Capital, who have been amazing partners throughout this journey. And we raised, deployed, and closed Fund One very quickly. What we see thematically is we invest primarily in American companies that are solving Canadian national security problems. And so, bringing ONE9 onto the cap table, we've experienced immediately that we're able to give an international market to some of our portfolio companies, specifically American companies. We're very well plugged in with the end users in Canada, whether that's conventional military end users, special operators, or the intelligence and signals intelligence communities. So we have a really good grasp of what the pain points are. We're really good at building capability. And so we've really focused our investment thesis on investing in really solid companies founded around great leadership, delivering technological solutions that enable a force employment concept and capability for end users while being able to kind of scale on the commercial side of the house. I'll pause there because I can keep going, man. Like,
No, dude, and you said this the first time I heard the story. Like, I love the story. I love the angle. It is one of one, which is so interesting
yeah,
because I feel like no matter where you look right now, I think everybody says like, "Oh, I'm the only one doing this," or "It's blue sky" or "blue ocean." There's not a lot of one of ones out there.
yeah.
So I guess two-sided question here is like, A, what does that mean like in Canada for you? Like, I'm
Uh,
thinking of like Silicon Valley before defense became cool, where like you'd roll in and be like, "Hey, I'm from the national security community," and a lot of people weren't really interested.
yeah, I mean, so Canada's an interesting market, and it's a double-edged sword in Canada, um, which is what predominantly why we're seeing a lot of, um, quite frankly, we're really humbled that we're invited in to participate on some of these deals alongside very strategic investors in the US. But essentially, what we get is a a country that, like, a good way to frame it for your listeners would be everything about Canada. Just think of it as 1/10 the United States, whether that is like our population, our GDP, right down to like the number of medals we'll win at an Olympics. Like the mix is almost identical, but it's just 1/10, except for hockey, where we dominate you guys in hockey.
We're
So
getting there though.
we're no, you know what? I was just down in Utica at the women's world championship, and we played our women played the Team USA in the finals, and it was without a doubt the best hockey game I've ever been to. So it's awesome to watch. It's great to see that rivalry sort of coming on the ice. And another great story is a hockey game that we had with one of the American counterpart units that might be the most violent game of hockey I've ever seen as well, which is kind of another good side story. But at the Canadian market, so think of it as 1/10. Canada is the other important thing to realize is Canada is not the United States. We are not the global leading superpower, but we are an incredibly important and relevant middle power, especially as we start looking at like geopolitical and geostrategic situations around the world. Now, what's painful right now is Canada has lost a lot of relevance over the past 8 years. And I won't get political, but we all have our druthers politically when we start looking at sort of inept leadership globally. Like there's a leadership void globally, especially in the national security and defense space. And I won't pick on anyone, who's leading countries right now, but we can all just look at our own leadership and just, question it and challenge our leaders to be accountable for the national security space. So in a weird way, we're kind of not quite holding up our end of the bargain nationally, but we have a really important end of that bargain to hold up. And when you look at continental North American defense, I mean, we are joined at the hip with the United States in our responsibility to protect that northern flank. So we have really tight NORAD bilateral mill-to-mill relationships. And for the most part, the end users in Canada deliver admirably. We just lose a little bit of like political support and spending. And so north of the border, we're doing a lot of work with end users and government and strategic decision makers to drive that demand signal to say, no, this is something we need to take very seriously. And if you just look at the truths of special operations, we know that SOF can't be created after emergencies occur. Well, if you spend money on your defense infrastructure after an event, you're playing catch up. You're not doing a very good job at deterring threats in the first place. And if you think it's expensive now, it's going to be a 10x expense if you try to do it after the fact. And so the defense game we're in is super expensive. If we're going to buy F-35s for Canada, it's going to be like an $88 billion contract that our taxpayers sort of have to hoist aboard. Yeah, it's a shitload of money, but that's a fraction of the amount of money we're going to have to spend after we actually have to deploy those F-35s to protect NORAD airspace in the event of incursions and shit coming over the top. So you think it's expensive now, just wait for it. So we're kind of helping kind of sell that message, and leads to the other side of that kind of coin on the Canadian investment side is we have a bit of a gun shy LP base. And so, those that get it, and they're super aggressive, fantastic LPs and investors, great advocates. But we need to do a better job of educating the Canadian LP base and the private capital, whether it's, ultra high net worth folks, family offices, institutional investors, and then the big ones, pension funds, not to mention federal government dollars, which, if we're going to call out what's not happening in Canada, we don't have a strategic pool of capital like the OSC out of the Pentagon. We don't have an NSIF like the Brits do, and we desperately need one. So we don't have that. We don't have that pool of trusted patient capital sort of deploying in the best interests of our sovereignty, and we have a gun shy LP base. Now that is changing as people are starting to get smart about defense. But what has sort of been the narrative is that defense is guns, bombs, and bullets. And, enter the term dual use, which is, kind of like a little bit of putting lipstick on a pig. Every company could have a defense application. And so, so many companies are dual use without having to explain dual use. And economically, from an investment perspective, we're going to get a great return if we can have, a wide array of markets that we're selling into. And so it's been a balance of advocating and pushing hard and unapologetically kind of waving the flag that no, we're a defense focused company, but still keeping like a comfort level with institutional LPs that just don't quite get it, or have limitations or bound by their own LPAs with their investors that might preclude it. But that is changing, and the strategic relevance of the Canadian AO, if we're going to look at Canada as an AO to our American partners and companies and funders, is huge. And so, what I would say is, don't discount Canada as a great spot to invest. Because I kind of joke, it's Canada's for sale and it's on sale. I can give your investors a 30% discount, and give your companies a 30% discount while delivering, phenomenal revenue to your companies and solving really important, not only Canadian national security priorities, but continental North American priorities. I'll pause there for a question, then kind of focus on at ONE9, one of the main areas that we're starting to shift focus on.
That was going to be, yeah. And that was going to be the next logical question for me is like, hey, I see the horizon. You're sort of looking across. I get the broader sort of like continental North America, the NORAD, sort of that. I get hey, we've got to build resiliency in for like over the horizon, day two kind of problems. Where do you have sort of the sensor sleeve right now? Like, what are you paying attention to? What's got you excited?
I mean, it's not excited because I'd have to go there and live and work out of the area, but it's from a strategic relevance, a financial return perspective. We're looking heavily at the Arctic right now. The Arctic is a geography, physical geography that has so much national security relevance. It's completely underutilized and underserviced. There are massive technology voids just given the sheer difficulty of operating in that environment. It is permeated with a shitload of nefarious nation state collection activities. We know that to be unequivocally, evidentially true. And it's rapidly changing as a result of climate. And so, we're seeing a geography rapidly open up that exposes supply chain risk, defense, national security risk, airspace risk, rare earth elements, mining risk, water rights, really important sort of strategic issues that can all play out under this umbrella in the Arctic, and there's no one putting any money into it, except some of our adversaries. And we need to find a great way to sort of counter that, but also modernize existing infrastructure that's been in there since sort of Cold War type era. So, there's going to have to be a rip and replace or a complete new build of so much critical infrastructure in that geography. And so again, as one of one in Canada, with even less focus of anyone even in Canada focusing on the Arctic, we see that as a huge opportunity, very strategically relevant within the North American context and the wider NATO context.
So, I mean, you talk about sort of the changing landscape, just even on like the geographical side, like the earth is changing sort of under our feet up there. We often talk about the pace of technological change or maybe the fluidity and sort of like operational realities. As you think about all of those different sort of planes shifting in real time, what are the types of capabilities or technologies that you're looking at, which is sort of a proxy for hey, for all the operating teams out there, the founders out there, the technologists that are listening, like,
Yeah.
who's maybe an interesting fit to come hit Glenn up?
Yeah. Comms network companies, persistent ISR, SATCOM capabilities that aren't on satellites, but that can have like that high orbit persistent coverage. We just made an investment in a mesh network company where there is no communications infrastructure, there is no cell infrastructure. You'd be hard pressed to even get like GPS coverage in a lot of areas into that geography. So a lot of those types of C5 ISR, JADC2 type technologies that fit within those. As the permanent ice starts to change and we start to see navigable waterways, maritime sensors, subsurface sensors, that is of significant interest. And Canada just released its defense policy with corresponding budget, which again is kind of woefully underwhelming when we actually look at it. But one of the areas that was announced last year was a $38 billion increase into NORAD modernization, which is going to be chunked out over sort of decades, but it's still, the short-term impetus on a lot of that sort of sensor technology, radar type technologies. And then of course, the data analytics, the software, the big data processing, the AIs that kind of make sense of all this sort of newfound data set that we're going to have to sort of learn from as we kind of really start to explore. It is like,
it's a big ass problem.
It's a big ass problem. And I didn't realize even like how fucking big it is and how hard it is to operate there. But like, I can fly from Ottawa, Canada, which is where we're based. I can fly to Caracas, Venezuela faster than I can fly to the northernmost Canadian Armed Forces base. Like that is crazy. And then when you get up there and you realize, if you're not protected to the elements, you don't go 20 minutes outside of town on a snowmobile, because if you slip a belt, you're fucking dead. Like it's a really, if you've seen Empire Strikes Back, it's like trying to build tech solutions on Planet Hoth. Like that's exactly what it
It's
looks.
a different world, and you've got a lot of tech that's having. I mean, there's just a Wall Street Journal article recently about some of the challenges that maybe more exquisite tech is facing in kinetic and contested environments.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, and this is austere. Like I don't think a lot of people have really experienced, brother.
You're on the moon. Like you're literally like,
Yeah.
and I know there's a lot of companies getting funded to build moon bases and shit, but like we're going to have to build new deep water seaports on the Arctic Ocean. We're going to have to build new airports, like airstrips. We're going
Yep.
to have to find ways of sustaining the tech once it's deployed with power sources. We got to deal with like really harsh climatic conditions just to like sustain and maintain the in-service support to depending on what tech gets deployed. So it is a challenging problem. There's a lot of money being thrown at it. And the other kind of cool thing about the Arctic is there is an indigenous population base up there. And for any of your listeners that were, soft, sort of focused, building capacity and building capability by, with, and through local populations is really important. And so identifying the right networks, the right people, and the right power brokers in those communities is really important in terms of like hedging your investment bet on how we're going to deploy the tech. Because great, we can build a sensor in the middle of a ice field. If it's not got the right in-service support to sort of take care of that with like a population base, then it's you're kind of throwing your money away. I think personally.
Yeah. I think it's an astute observation about sort of the capacity building and some of the challenges there, right? Like we at the soft level, I think we've demonstrated a strong capacity for it. At a more like general purpose force level, like we've just not been great at any of that, even in like highly structured environments. So I think as we're sort of making the turn, two last questions. One is this might be a little bit of a wild card, but like, what's the one thing you wish more people knew about Canadian sort of national security and defense?
That we take it really seriously. The end users that are out there every day, whether it's a soft task force deployed, Canada has a really amazing ability to punch above its weight. And I think it's important that people recognize and remember we're not the United States, and we're not trying to be, and we're not trying to compete with the United States. But being in some regards, finding capabilities where we have like really significant specialties, augmenting some of the task force and sort of working very closely with our American counterparts and our Brit counterparts um, is um, is huge. And so, my entire career, we were stacked up with special mission units from Virginia or North Carolina, and we were like fighting and bleeding and killing bad guys together, like we're interchangeable in the stack. And I think that gets lost on a lot of people that like we bring a great capability to the fight. And if we own it and own what we're really good at, it's a big compliment to, stacking up and working in these sort of CJ soda or soft task force types environments. And that's what I love about the thing I love about venture investing the most is, especially like when a syndicate of investors comes together to do a deal and you've got a bunch of other funds with like ex operators involved. The characteristic of that venture investment is like the creation of a soft task force or a CJ SOTF. And the complementary nature of what everyone's bringing to the fight to deliver returns to their investors and see those companies scale is the same thing as if we're stacking up on a target to kind of prosecute a target. And the aha moment I had with venture was like, it's not rocket science. Like neither's doing a high speed direct action. Like it's not rocket science. You just have to have like a system of sort of intelligence led sort of reconnaissance. You have to have like your F3EA targeting cycle. You deploy your finite resources at a specific point in time and place to achieve an effect. You're doing it with like specially curated, selected teams that share in the risk because it's a high risk, high reward environment. You got your contingency plans and your supporting plans because if you haven't done a venture deal where you have to like implement a contingency plan to help your founders out, then you're doing something probably wrong. And then there's invariably going to be an exit or a pivot. And so when we were down in Tampa, with Joe and the launch of Schoolhouse, which was an awesome event, by the way, kind of reminded me of the first book I read from McCraven, where he builds sort of the soft pyramid of planning and execution, but then has that spot of relative superiority. And when a soft force loses its position of relative superiority, it's time to either exit, accept your vulnerability, replace with a conventional force. And I see the same thing sort of in the venture world. And it usually revolves around the next fundraise. But you can kind of see these like times of relative superiority waxing and waning, which form these like logical decision points as an investor supporting your founders in their journey to scale their company. So I just saw tons of overlap. I'm like,
Yeah, it's a super interesting way to like look at relevance transferability. Like that's
totally.
like, yeah, that's a good lens to frame that through. I like
Yeah,
that. We'll
well,
steal some of that.
I've had to come up with a way to frame it because as I was, fundraising, it's like, the fuck do you know about finance
Yeah.
and venture? I'm like, well, I know about executing
You're like,
high.
no, I am relative superiority. This is where
Exactly.
you're investing.
Yeah, I'm good with mitigating risk, which is kind of what venture is, like,
Hell yeah, that fucking
so
rocks.
yeah, man. Uh,
All right, last question for you. Right, we talked about a whole bunch of shit. We talked about
yeah, yeah,
the state of sort of broader NORAD. We talked about the broader sort of like global defense and national security, like the leadership lattice or lack thereof there.
yeah.
We talked about the Arctic. We talked about, austere tech environments and deployments. We talked about fundraising. Across that whole sort of compendium, you're king for a day, right?
Oh, yeah.
Glenn's got the magic wand. What are you
Yep.
smashing it on? What are you changing and why?
I am implementing mandatory national service for every 18-year-old kid in Canada. Whether that is joining the military, working in support of wildfire fighting, whether it's working in long-term care facilities for the elderly,
Yep.
every 18-year-old kid coming out of high school is going to do 1 or 2 years of national service. Um,
Love
and
it.
and I would do that to uh, you know, one, improve the quality of our workforce, um, ensure that our young men and women are being armed with a skill set that they can grow businesses and maybe spill out entrepreneurial benefits based on what they learn in those 1 or 2 years, so that we drive a higher standard in our Canadian Armed Forces. We're having, like everyone, we're having a recruiting challenge right now, and our answer to that is to reduce the standard. It's fucking ridiculous. It makes absolutely no sense. You want to attract a good, aggressive, disciplined professional army, raise the standard. The best recruiting campaign is the British Royal Marines. There was one line that said 99% need not apply. So I think implementing like a national service program would actually increase the standard. I think it would decrease selfishness, and I'm a big believer in serving your country. And I think there's lots of good ways that people can do it and add value to all kinds of different sectors within the country.
I mean, like, foot stomp here. I think there is so much merit in showing young adults that there are things bigger than them,
Yeah,
and acting in service to something that is not yourself is a transformative experience.
100%.
It will increase, right? You talk about that scale, right? 99% need not apply, right? It takes that bottom quartile and it moves that up. And we're leveling up the nation and the future. Like, let's fucking go. That
Let's
rocks.
fucking go. Love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that, I'm going to wrap us up. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I think you guys can see that Glenn and I can go for like 5 hours on this because this stuff's awesome and it's important. Glenn, dude, thanks as always for being generous with your experience and your insights and your knowledge. It's always a fucking blast, dude. And looking forward to the Gatling gun soon.
It's going to happen. Bourbon's on the range next time, I guess.
Heck
Right.
yeah,
So,
brother. Heck
all
yeah.
right. Thanks, bro. Good
Thanks,
seeing you.
everybody. Cheers.